In 1939, Germany invaded Poland, plunging Europe into yet another global conflict. By the early 1940s, Great Britain is the last remaining European country standing in between Germany and total conquest. Since July of 1940, the Germans have carried out relentless daylight and nighttime bombings of mainland Britain, with the goal of breaking the morale of the British people. Targets of this relentless bombing campaign were industrial centers and population centers. However, the British will held, and they continued to fight back against the Germans. Germany and its allies were relentless, invading the British Empire and trying to deprive Britain of her much-needed vital resources. Despite these attempts by the Germans to force the British into a surrender, they managed to hold out, in large part thanks to the constant stream of supplies coming from North America via the North Atlantic convoys. On May 18, 1941, the new German battleship Bismarck, along with the new heavy cruiser Prince Eugen, began Operation Rheinubong. The primary goal of the operation was to have Prince Eugen engage and sink enemy merchant ships, while the Bismarck would tie down any enemy combat vessels that would try to intercept the pair. The hope of Rheinubong would be a repeat of the successful Operation Berlin by the German battleship Scharnhorst and Gneisenau, which had ended in March of 1941. In command of the Bismarck and Prince Eugen was Rear Admiral Gunther Lütjens. He was a World War I veteran and a career officer in both the Reichsmarine and the Kriegsmarine. He was also the planner and commander of the successful Operation Berlin a few months prior. The Bismarck and Prince Eugen were two of the newest and most powerful warships that Germany had at the time. The Bismarck herself was the largest commissioned European warship in the war, and would remain so until the commissioning of HMS Vanguard after the war. Bismarck was armed with 8 15-inch guns, along with 12 6-inch secondaries and 16 4-inch secondaries, and capable of reaching speeds over 31 knots. Her armor scheme also kept her exceptionally well protected. When fully loaded, she displaced over 50,000 tons. With the pair of ships making a break for the Atlantic, they were both sighted by the Swedish Navy. This information was then forwarded to the Swedish government, then from informants inside the Swedish government to the British Admiralty. Admiral Sir John Tovey, the commander-in-chief of the British Home Fleet, sailed with the new battleship King George V, in hopes to intercept the pair before they could break out into the Atlantic. Other elements of the Home Fleet were also deployed in order to intercept the pair. On May 23rd, the County-class heavy cruisers of the Royal Navy, the Norfolk and the Suffolk, were already patrolling in the Denmark Strait. They spotted the Bismarck and the Prince Eugen and began to shadow them. On the evening of the 23rd, the Norfolk and the Suffolk wandered too close to the Bismarck and Prince Eugen for Lütjen's liking. Lütjen ordered Bismarck turn and charged the two heavy cruisers, both of which disengaged. This would be the first time Bismarck would fire her guns in anger. Due to the concussion of the 15-inch guns, Bismarck's radar was knocked out. Lütjen ordered Prince Eugen take the lead with her still functioning radar, and Bismarck took up position behind the Prince Eugen as they continued on, with the Norfolk and the Suffolk falling back behind visual range but maintaining radar contact with the two German ships. As the Bismarck and the Prince Eugen pressed on through the Denmark Strait, there would be another pair of British ships waiting for them, but this time they were much more than heavy cruisers. The old battlecruiser HMS Hood and the new King George V class battleship Prince of Wales. The following battle would go down in history as the Battle of the Denmark Strait. At 5:52 in the morning on May 24th, the British ships under command of Vice Admiral Holland opened up on the lead ship, believing her to be Bismarck, when in fact it was Prince Eugen. The British were attempting to close range in on the two German ships, knowing that the Hood had thin deck armor, and wished to eliminate the possibility of plunging fire from the two German ships. The Germans held their fire until 5:55. Lütjen did not give the order to open fire. The captain of the Bismarck, Ernst Lindman, responded to Lütjen's lack of an order by saying, "I'm not letting my ship get shot out from under my ass, open fire." Prince Eugen scores an early hit, igniting a large fire on Hood's amidships. At some point during the battle, the Prince of Wales realized they were targeting Prince Eugen and not Bismarck, and began to train her guns on Bismarck and open fire on her. By the time the Hood realized they were firing at Prince Eugen and not Bismarck, Bismarck had already straddled the Hood twice. After already straddling the Hood twice, the Bismarck once again prepares to fire a fifth salvo on the Hood. One of Bismarck's 15-inch shells had penetrated the magazine of the Hood. Within 5 minutes of opening up on the two German ships, the Hood had sunk. This left Prince of Wales alone, with many of her main battery guns having technical issues and being out of the battle. She turned to disengage from the pair. The two German ships continued to pelt her as she disengaged. A salvo from Bismarck would hit the conning tower of the Prince of Wales, killing all of the bridge staff. Once again, Bismarck and Prince Eugen found themselves being tailed by the Norfolk and the Suffolk. Once again, Bismarck charged the two cruisers. This time, however, the Prince Eugen detached from Bismarck and went on about carrying out Operation Rheinubong to raid merchant vessels. The Battle of the Denmark Strait did not leave Bismarck completely unscarred, however. She had several holes in her fuel and oil tanks courtesy of Prince of Wales' 14-inch guns. These oil slicks made it possible for the cruisers to continue to shadow Bismarck from beyond visual range or without radar contact. The sinking of the Hood was more than the Royal Navy losing one of its largest and most powerful warships. The Hood herself had come to personify Britain's naval dominance and become a major cultural icon for Britain, the loss of which could not go unanswered. Prime Minister Winston Churchill issued one order to the Royal Navy: sink the Bismarck. All Royal Navy assets in the North Atlantic were tasked with hunting down the Bismarck, including the old Nelson-class battleship Rodney, the battlecruiser HMS Repulse, and the aircraft carrier HMS Ark Royal, along with HMS King George V, HMS Norfolk and Sheffield, and some 21 destroyers. All hunting down a very lonely and very wounded German battleship. However, the British weren't the only ones with a fleet in the North Atlantic. The Kriegsmarine's U-boat fleet had been retasked by Admiral Dönitz to provide support for the Bismarck. The U-boats were to form a picket line for Bismarck to draw her British pursuers across. The U-boats would ambush the British ships, the mere threat of which would cause the British ships to break off. The British enact plans of their own to stop the Bismarck from reaching not only U-boat support, but also Luftwaffe support from mainland France. Torpedo aircraft were launched from the carrier HMS Ark Royal. However, these aircraft were obsolete swordfish biplanes being piloted by pilots that were still undergoing training. This showed when they accidentally mistook the cruiser Sheffield, who was shadowing Bismarck, for the Bismarck. However, the torpedoes they launched had magnetic detonators, which proved to be unreliable and did not detonate against Sheffield's hull, which were then swapped out for contact detonators. On their second sortie to find the Bismarck, the swordfish succeeded in finding the Bismarck, and began their attacks. Without losing a single plane, the Swordfish had managed to conduct a successful attack against the Bismarck, scoring 3 hits on the ship, 1 hitting her rudders, jamming both the port and starboard rudders. The starboard rudder had managed to be repaired, but the port rudder was helpless. Bismarck was now stuck sailing in a large circle, and her fate was sealed. As nighttime fell, 5 destroyers of Tovey's fleet approached the Bismarck and harassed her throughout the night, in order to deny the Bismarck's crew any time for recovery before Admiral Tovey's fleet arrived. As the destroyers went on about the night firing star shells and near misses at Bismarck, one destroyer broke ranks and began to charge the Bismarck. This was not a British destroyer, however, but a Polish destroyer, the Prion, and her and her crew had a very simple message for the Bismarck.
Get them, Polakiem! Get them, Polakiem! Get them, Polakiem! Get them, Polakiem!
Running low on fuel, the Prion was forced to disengage the Bismarck. And when dawn broke, Bismarck found herself surrounded by Tovey's force, including the Rodney, whose crew had managed to push her faster than her designed top speed, the King George V, the cruisers Dorsetshire and Sheffield, along with 7 destroyers. King George V and Rodney opened fire at 8:47, followed by Bismarck returning suit at 8:50. The last stand of the Bismarck had begun. After relentlessly assaulting the Bismarck for almost 3 hours, Tovey ordered the Dortcher in to torpedo the Bismarck. At this point, Bismarck was little more than a flaming hulk on fire from stem to stern. At this time, too, the order had been given to scuttle the Bismarck. Either way, the Bismarck had capsized by 10:35, and by 10:40 had completely slipped beneath the waves. Of the 2,221-man crew, only 115 survived. Of Hood's 1,500 crew, only 3 survived.